exposed two spine-chilling true stories of haunted secrets and sinister, unexplained horrors. The night crept back in, shadows stretching hungrily and wrapping around Sarah's modest home like fingers tightening around her throat. She had just finished another sleepless night at the diner, her oil-stained uniform clinging to her skin. The fading light outside felt like a warning. It was as if the sun itself recoiled from the neighborhood and its heart-wrenching decline. Beauty and festivity lost to time, leaving only echoes of desperation. Sarah's heart hammered as she opened the creaky door, stepping into the darkness that lingered in every corner of the house. A small, worn-out monument to her struggle. As she walked down the narrow hallway, her children called for her, their voices strained and sleep-heavy. Lily and Ben, the reason she woke up each morning despite the weight of despair. But the light in their eyes dimmed with each passing day, dreams fading into nightmares. The walls whispered secrets, and Sarah grabbed her flashlight, flicking it on as if it could ward off the unseen terrors lurking within their haven. But tonight felt different. Outside, the wind howled, biting through the cracks in her door. The garden, her little patch of defiance, seemed to pulse with tension. She knelt beside rows of overgrown herbs and dug her fingers into the earth, looking for reassurance. That's when she saw them, strange symbols carved into the wooden fence, jagged lines glimmering in the fading light. They felt alive, breathing warnings of lost souls and buried curses. At first, Sarah shrugged it off as kids messing around, but then the notes began to arrive, slipped under her door in the dead of night. Cryptic messages warned her about Mr. Hargrove, the kindly old man next door. The whispers about him swirled in her mind like a noxious cloud, growing thicker when the children began to speak of things she wished they hadn't seen. "Mummy, the shadows are watching us again," they said, eyes wide, terrified. The way they trembled as they clung to her felt like icy fingers tracing her spine. Sarah's instincts were screaming to protect her children. She raced to the sheriff's office, pleading her case. Their doubts were palpable. She saw it in their eyes, a mixture of skepticism and pity. "You're just tired, Sarah," one officer muttered, but as she left, the weight of their disbelief sat heavily on her shoulders. Back home, the notes grew more direct. They mapped a chilling timeline of local law, detailing disappearances, old stories told in hushed whispers about shadows taking childlike forms. Sarah's heart raced. Each alarming tick echoed like a countdown. Then, just as she settled her children into bed, a storm broke loose. Thunder shook the walls, rattling the windows. Suddenly, a knock shattered the thick silence, pulling her from her thoughts. With trembling hands, she clutched the flashlight and peeled the door open, heart in her throat. There he was, Mr. Hargrove, the facade of gentle kindness warped by the shadows of the storm. His smile felt like a blade, and the air around her tightened, thickening with dread. Cold sweat dripped down her spine as she took in the twisted grin that revealed more than just an old neighbor standing just steps away. It beckoned with darkness. "Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system, and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue." "Sarah," he crooned, voice low and dripping with something sickly sweet, "there are secrets buried deeper than you can imagine." The air itself felt charged, pregnant with unspoken horrors as she stood frozen, horror clawing at her veins. What had been a place of refuge now transformed into a den of shadows, where even trust faded into echoes of uncertainty. The fight for her family's safety was about to begin, caught in the web of mysteries that had been woven around them. Would she unravel the truth before it ensnared them all? The wind howled through the cracked windows, carrying Mr. Hargrove's menacing smile into the dimly lit room. For a brief moment, time seemed to pause. The words hung between them, heavy with malice, and Sarah's breath quickened. She instinctively backed away from the door, desperately putting distance between herself and the man who had turned neighborly advice into a threat. "What do you want?" she stammered, attempting to mask the tremor in her voice. But fear clawed at her throat, choking off her bravado as she thought of Lily and Ben asleep just down the hall. "Just a little chat, dear," he replied, the sickly sweetness of his tone dripping like poison. "You see, you've been uncovering things best left buried, and that can have consequences." At that moment, a distant boom of thunder echoed like a warning. Heart racing, Sarah cast a quick glance behind him. The children's bedroom door stood slightly ajar, and in that sliver of darkness she could imagine the shadows creeping closer, inching toward her innocent babies. "Mr. Hargrove, this isn't funny," she insisted, solidifying her resolve. "Back off, I'm calling the police." "What? You think they can help you?" The old man chuckled, dark amusement flashing in his eyes. "The police don't care about your silly fears. They don't understand. But I do." His gaze bore into her, chilling her bones. A low laugh ghosted through the air as his words sank in. She reached for her phone, but a sudden flicker of the lights threw the room into darkness. Panic surged within her. In the blackness, she could feel the weight of his presence, the intangible chill curling around her like a serpent. Children should be seen and not heard, don't you think? His voice was a low whisper, brushing against her ear, sending a shiver coursing down her spine. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered back to life, illuminating his twisted form by the doorway. But there was something unsettling about the shadows at his sides, moving as though they had a will of their own. Shapes bent and contorted, stretching menacingly toward the children's room. "Stop! Leave them alone!" Sarah shouted, her fear boiling over into fierce protection. In a sudden rush, she lunged towards him, scrambling to push him out and slam the door shut behind him. With frantic urgency, she locked it and turned to face the darkness closing in within her home. She darted to her children's bedroom, intent on checking on them. As she reached the door, she noticed a strange hum resonating from the closet, a sound that felt both magnetic and suffocating. She hesitated, the air charged with foreboding. "Lily, Ben, wake up," she called, her voice strained. The children stirred, blue eyes blinking in confusion. But they weren't responding to her urgency in the way she hoped. Instead, their gaze was entranced, fixed on the closet, where shadows began swirling, twisting into grotesque forms that laughed silently. "Mommy, they're here," Lily whispered, her small fingers pointing towards the shifting darkness. "The shadows, they want to play." Despair churned in Sarah's stomach, the meaning of their words crashing against her like waves. Their trust in her slipped like sand between her fingers. "Stay close! Don't look!" she shrieked, instinctively pulling them close, just as an unnatural chill swept through the room, extinguishing the light, plunging them into renewed fear. In the thick darkness, she felt the whispering shadows wrapping around them, a chorus of lost voices rising like a chilling wind, drowning out her thoughts, and amidst it all, Mr. Hargrove's laughter echoed, pulling her deeper into dread. Then, through the turmoil of despair and tension, came a knock at the window, sharp and deliberate, unlike anything before. Sarah's heart raced again. What lurked out there? And did it mean her children harmed too? Before she could make sense of her next move, she felt a cold breath down her neck. "Let's play." A childlike voice echoed just behind her. The darkness tightened its grip, and shadows began to swirl faster, drawing closer, as terror gripped Sarah's heart. In this moment, she realized, this battle was only just beginning. What sinister game was unfolding around them? And what had Mr. Hargrove awakened within the sealed confines of their haven? The whispering shadows grew thicker, swirling about Sarah, feeling like tendrils of ice crawling along her skin. The air turned heavy, thick with a stench she couldn't place, sweet yet rotten, like something long buried. Her breath came short and sharp, panic clawing at her chest as she gripped her children tighter. "Mommy, I don't like this game." Ben's small voice trembled, breaking the silence, sending a fresh wave of dread coursing through her. "Me neither, sweetheart," she replied, adrenaline pumping as she fought to hold on to her fragile calm. "We need to get out of here, right now." Just as she turned to lead them towards the hallway, the window rattled ominously, the knuckles rapping against the glass, like skeletal fingers beckoning her closer. Ignoring it, she tugged at the door, pushing it open with all her strength, but a gust of wind surged in, slamming it shut. "Why won't it open?" Lily's voice was muffled by the deafening chaos surrounding them. The whispering gained volume, a cacophony of insistent knocks and haunting laughter ringing in her ears, blending with the terrible mirth of shadows mocking her efforts. "Stay behind me," Sarah ordered, her heart pounding as dread tightened around her like a vice. She could feel their hungry stares, like 1,000 eyes boring into her back. Desperately, she tugged on the door again, shoving her shoulder against it. The wood creaked, seeming almost to breathe as it resisted her. Suddenly the door burst open, revealing the hallway bathed in an eerie glow from her dwindling flashlight. But then came a shriek, a horrible sound that scraped at the edges of her sanity. "What was that?" Ben gasped, clinging to her. The noise came again, a twisted echo of childlike laughter melding with howls that sent shivers down her spine. It wasn't just coming from the closet any longer. It was all around them, crawling up the walls, manifesting in the corners of her vision. Sarah's breath quickened. There was no explanation for it, only the suffocating fear that continued to invade her mind. Without thinking, she rushed into the hallway, dragging Lily and Ben close to her. They stumbled, falling over each other, fear propelling them forward. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the house, and for a brief moment she saw it. Figures in the shadows, faces twisted in agony and glee, reaching out with fingers elongated like claws. "Mommy, what are they?" Lily cried, her wide eyes filled with terror. "Just keep moving, don't look," Sarah urged, panic fueling her movements. As she rounded the corner, the front door loomed ahead like a portal to safety. Each step felt monumental, dragging through thick mud. The shadows writhed and twisted, fingers brushing against her, trying to pull her back. A sound exploded behind them. The closet door flew open with a crash. In its dark maw, Sarah could see something moving, slithering out into the dim light. Her heart thundered as she realized the truth flooding her mind like icy water. The shadows weren't merely drifting, they were alive. "Sarah," came Hargrove's voice from somewhere beyond her, "you can't escape their invitation." The sheer force of dread slammed into her, thick and overpowering. She wasn't just fleeing from a neighbor, she was running from something older and more sinister, something hidden beneath the surface of her reality. With a final burst of courage, she reached the door, flinging it wide, but the night outside seemed to yawn into an abyss that called to her, drawing her in like a siren. "Mommy, don't!" Ben shrieked, as fingers of the shadows grasped at her shoes, pulling her down. The turbulence of fear became palpable, a living thing that clawed at her skin, wrapping around her like a cocoon. In that very moment, as Sarah found herself teetering on the edge of the unknown, she felt the shadows whisper in unison, a promise and a threat. "Join us. Forever." Then with a jolt, the ground beneath her trembled as the air thickened with a new sound, the sinister hiss of laughter all around them, rising to a deafening crescendo that made her blood run cold. What freedom lay beyond that threshold, and what price must she pay to escape? Only one thing was certain. The game had only just begun. The night swallowed the house whole, darkness wrapping around it like a living shroud. Outside, the wind howled, a tortured wail that mixed with the laughter still echoing in Sarah's ears. She felt fingers of ice clutching at her ankles, pulling her back into the dark. She gritted her teeth, desperate to break free. "Mommy!" Ben screamed, his small body shaking against hers. "Hold on, I've got you!" She swung her arm fiercely, trying to shake off the shadows, wrapping tighter around her legs. With a burst of resolve, Sarah lunged forward, yanking Ben and Lily with her. The shadows hissed in outrage, sounding almost like a swarm of angry bees. She didn't look back, forcing her feet to carry her towards the crisp breath of night air, almost in reach. "Stay close," she urged. A chilling cackle rolled through the air, more booming than the storm, and her heart jumped into her throat. They rushed through the threshold, tumbling onto the damp grass outside. But the safety she craved was short-lived. The air was rich with malice, palpable like fog. The world beyond the door was twisted and dark, and the shadows that had chased them spilled out, darting across the lawn, dancing in a ghastly ballet. "What's happening?" Lily cried, clutching at her mother's coat. Sarah glanced wildly around. There was no refuge here, no reprieve from the chaos that seemed to crawl from every corner. The house loomed behind them, a cavern of terror, knocking against the storm's fury. "Mommy!" Ben pointed, his voice rising in pitch. Sarah followed his gesture, panic blooming in her chest. Their neighbors stood at the end of the street, frozen in strange postures, eyes blank, expressions awash with vacuity. A collective gaze, vast and hollow, turned toward her, beckoning her with ghastly smiles that felt wrong in every way. "Let's get away from here," she shouted, tugging at her children, trying to shield them from whatever sinister force had taken hold of their community. They stumbled onto the road, hearts pounding like drums in the silence that followed. "Do you want to play?" The neighbors' voices rose together, a wretched chorus that sent shivers down her spine. "It's so much fun to join us." Fear urged Sarah to push forward, each step feeling weighted, like she was moving through thick mud. The streetlights flickered, their light fading rapidly. The laughter morphed into a chant, echoing off the very walls of her sanity. It felt as if the world was collapsing into the maw of the house they had just escaped, pulling everything into a dark abyss. Suddenly, she caught sight of Hargrove standing a few feet away. His face, pale and strained, was etched with something between disbelief and glee. "You chose to run, Sarah, but the shadows are always watching. You'll never be free. Stop fighting." A sinking dread unfurled in her gut, the truth a bitter pill to swallow. The shadows weren't isolated. They were the very fabric of the night, weaving reality into a tapestry of horror. "Run!" she screamed, but the command felt feeble against the sinister resonance that surrounded them. The neighbors began to shuffle toward them, their movements jerky, almost mechanical, as one, their arms outstretched, grasping at air, but the intent was clear. "Join us, forever!" Collapsing in on itself, the night clawed at her resolve, as Sarah's mind raced with fragmented thoughts. Could they survive this madness? Were they meant to be part of this terrible game? The shadows were closing in, the laughter intensifying, drowning her cries for escape. Between the pressing walls of despair, she felt herself being drawn into the depths. All her instincts screamed to run, but the ground beneath her feet felt like quicksand, pulling her closer to the darkness. Then came a single flicker. An idea sparked in her mind, desperate but possibly their only chance. We need to confront it, shine a light on this evil. With newfound determination, Sarah turned back to the house, refusing to let the darkness take her. As she did, she felt the shadows slow, momentarily stunned. Was it the flicker of resolve that had unnerved them? Or was it just a brief reprieve before the inevitable? Ben and Lily mirrored her turn, their fear mingled with a fragile hope, eyes wide as they faced the chaos behind them. "Mommy, what do we do now?" Ben whispered. As they all braced for the final push against the shadows, the darkness quivered, alive and hungry. What awaited them inside, and what tone would their desperate stand strike against the twisted invitation of despair? Only one thing was certain. The shadows were calling, and they were far from done with their game. The door creaked open, revealing the yawning maw of the house. The air was thick with a sulphurous stench, as if the walls themselves were weeping. Sarah stepped inside, dragging her children with her. The shadows recoiled like venomous snakes, but the unsettling laughter followed close behind, a chilling reminder that something dark lurked just beyond the periphery of their senses. "Mommy!" Lily whimpered, her voice barely a whisper against the overwhelming darkness. "Stay close," Sarah replied, her own voice trembling as she glanced back at the now far-off street, noting the eerie stillness that shrouded their neighbors like a funeral shroud. Their hollow faces were now mere silhouettes against the pale moonlight, a morbid audience to her worst nightmare. The hushed tone of the house was suffocating, heavy with hidden secrets. Shadows flickered, twisting in the corners, breathing and laughing in monologues of despair. "You can't hide from us, Sarah," they seemed to taunt, their whispers curling around her, squeezing the air from her lungs. Determined, Sarah pushed deeper into the interior, clutching Ben and Lily's hands with a grip that felt stronger than the fear gnawing at her mind. She stalked through the living room, past the curtains that fluttered like trapped souls, her heart pounding like a war drum. Suddenly, an idea struck her. The light! The flashlights! She had seen them on the kitchen counter while they were scrambling to escape. If they could illuminate the shadows, maybe, just maybe, they could stave off the encroaching horror. "Follow me!" she shouted, moving toward the kitchen, where darkness pooled like spilled ink. As they entered, a wave of cold swept over them, knocking the breath from Sarah's lungs. The kitchen was just as she remembered, cluttered and old, the walls lined with faded family photos that grinned down at them with sadistic glee. She stepped over the broken shards of glass littering the floor, scraps from yesterday's mundane life, now replaced by chaos. "Mommy, the shadows." Ben's voice was a soft plea, and she turned, only to find the tendrils of darkness creeping ever closer, hungry for their warmth. "Hold on!" she hissed as she finally spotted the flashlights on the counter. She snatched two, handed one to Lily, and flicked the switch. A beam of light burst forth, illuminating a patch of the kitchen. The shadows shrieked, recoiling as if burned. Encouraged, Sarah swung her beam at the encroaching darkness, advancing steadily. "We're not afraid," she called, more confident now. But a ghastly face appeared in the pooling darkness, eyes like black voids, mouth twisted in a grotesque smile. It leaned closer, whispering secrets of despair. "You can't escape what you are, Sarah. You belong to the shadows." Sarah's resolve wavered, clawing at the back of her mind, but she didn't have time to acknowledge it. "Ben, Lily, stay close," she barked, positioning herself as a shield between her children and the writhing shadows. Suddenly, the kitchen window exploded outward, raining glass on them as a gust of wind rushed inside with a deafening roar. The light flickered. For a moment, it felt like the house itself was screaming, mourning its lost power. "Mommy!" Lily cried, terror leaking into her voice. "Shine the light!" Sarah shouted, thrusting her flashlight towards the darkened window, where shadows gathered like 1,000 hands reaching for them. But the shadows were relentless, darting in and out, knitting together a tapestry of fear that pressed against her chest, trying to suffocate her with memories long buried. Then, from the corner of her eye, she noticed the family portraits on the wall, the faces shifting, changing, becoming grotesque caricatures of sorrow and malevolence. "No, it can't be," she stammered, gazing into their hollow eyes. In an instant, clarity struck. What if the house fed on fear, transforming their memories into fuel for its malevolence? A surge of rage replaced her despair. She wouldn't allow it to prey on her family. With every ounce of strength, she directed the beam of light at the portraits. "This ends now!" she shouted, a wild determination flooding her veins. The shadows writhed in fury, shrieking as the pure light struck them, the cries resounding as the air thickened with desperation. But even as the portraits pulsed, she felt a chilling touch against her spine. It was the darkness, remapping her fear, tightening its grip. And then the laughter started again, echoing from behind, merging with anguish as the walls trembled. "Join us! You'll never leave!" As that relentless chant filled the space, despair threatened to drown her. Would they succumb to the shadows, or find a way to fight back against the suffocating darkness? Only one option remained, to push forward, even as every instinct screamed for them to flee. With the lights flickering, shadows danced ominously around them. Sarah's heart raced. What if her family was absorbed into that sinister whisper, becoming part of the game? There was only one way to find out. Face the horrors of the night, step deeper into the shadows, and reclaim what they had lost. Would she uncover a truth that would turn the game against them, or become yet another lost wisp in the darkness? The air crackled with tension as Sarah tightened her grip on the flashlight. The laugh reverberated through the kitchen, each note a dagger aimed at her heart. "Join us! You'll never leave!" The shadows pulsed, writhing and slithering closer, eager to claim their prey. "Focus, Mum! Shine the light!" Ben's voice broke through her rising panic. A flash of urgency ignited her resolve. She pivoted sharply, casting the beam toward the pulsing darkness that threatened to swallow them whole. The light sliced through the shadows like a knife through fog. For a brief second, clarity emerged. But then, with piercing clarity, she heard it, a whisper just beneath her thoughts. "You will not escape." It sent a shiver down her spine, causing her to falter. "No!" she screamed, stomping her foot like a warrior on the front lines. "We will find a way out!" She pushed forward, foot after foot, battling against an invisible tide that sought to drag them back into oblivion. "Mommy!" Lily's voice quavered, her expression a mixture of fright and confusion. It struck Sarah like the sting of cold water, pulling her back to the reality that lay vulnerable before her. Her children needed her. The thoughts surged through her. They were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting to reclaim their lives from something that had stolen them. The photos on the wall distorted grotesquely, seemingly mocking her with the absurdity of her courage. In their twisted facades, she could feel remnants of past joys turning to fear, memories twisted into weapons. Desperate to eliminate their hold, she darted towards another portrait, a photo of her family smiling together before everything went wrong. "Lily, shine your light here," Sarah commanded. As her daughter obeyed, the light bounced off the glass, casting eerie reflections that danced around the room. It was then that Sarah noticed a subtle pulsing at the edges of the beam, nudging the shadows back further. They hissed, wriggling like bugs denied their feast. "Mom, it's working!" Ben exclaimed, his voice an unexpected beacon in the chaos. Yet the shadows remained relentless, intricately intertwined, morphing like liquid darkness. They hissed and slithered, seeking entry through the cracks in Sarah's composure. The alarming reminder of vulnerability made her gulp. Memories surged forward, the unkept promises, the laughs hanging like ghosts in the air. Every sorrow navigated through the dark tendrils like a haunting melody. And then the house responded, groaning as if trying to shatter its own restraints. The walls vibrated, echoing the laughter that now climbed to manic highs. "You are ours!" they shrieked. "Your memories feed us!" "Keep fighting! Push them away!" Sarah yelled, thrusting her flashlight toward the swirling darkness. But as she moved the light, she saw something change. The laughter faltered, but a new sensation crept in, thick and palpable, a cold dread humming in the back of her mind. Suddenly a figure emerged from the shadows, silhouetted against the waning light, a tall, gaunt shape, its eyes reflecting pinpoints of darkness. It grinned, revealing a mouth filled with teeth too sharp and too many. "Join us!" it crooned, voice dripping like honey laced with venom. Sarah stumbled back, the blood draining from her face. "No, stay away!" Her heart raced as she realized it mirrored her fear, her shortcomings, even her doubts. This wasn't just a fight against shadows, it was a fight against herself. Lily and Ben stood frozen, their small bodies shaking like leaves in a storm, but Sarah could feel the grip of the flashlight tightening in her hand. She took a step forward, determination bursting within her chest. "We won't be yours," she declared fiercely. "You won't take my family." With that, she launched the beam of light onto the grotesque figure, the shadows recoiling violently. The laughter turned to shrieks of rage, a sound so bone-chilling it reverberated through her bones. Light splintered against the darkness, illuminating facets of terror that erupted in horrid displays. "Mommy, the door!" Ben shouted, pointing frantically as cracks appeared in the otherwise solid frame of the kitchen entrance. Just then, a cacophony of whispers washed over them. "You can't take what's ours. We will consume you." The walls twisted, and the darkness deepened, compressing the air until it felt like they couldn't breathe. Sarah faced her children, their eyes wide in terror. "We need to leave now!" With one last burst of energy, Sarah directed her light toward the exit, leading her children forward. But as they raced toward the door, shadows recoiled, curling around their legs like a liquid darkness trying to pull them back. What awaited them on the other side? Would escape bring freedom, or was this just the beginning of a darker journey? As they burst through the door, a chilling anticipation loomed. The shadows didn't vanish. They hung, waiting just outside the threshold. "You can run, but you cannot hide," they whispered, echoing into the night. Would they truly escape, or merely step into a new realm of horror? The night air was thick with dread, heavy and cloying, as Sarah, Ben, and Lily spilled out into the wide expanse of the backyard. The moon hung high and unforgiving, casting a stark glow over the grass. But the shadows that erupted from the house felt impenetrable, dancing like wraiths hungry for the heat of their skin. "Which way do we go?" Ben's voice, though still filled with urgency, had a tremor that betrayed his fear. "Anywhere but here!" Sarah shouted, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She swept the flashlight in a wide arc, desperate to keep the creeping darkness at bay. The beam illuminated the trees at the edge of the yard, gnarled and twisted. Their branches reached out like skeletal fingers, waiting for something to ensnare. But the shadows from the house stole her thoughts, whispering promises of despair. "You can't escape your past." Around them, the air grew colder, as if the whispers turned into a tangible cold, wrapping around the trio like a shroud. "Stay close!" Sarah barked. She grabbed both children by the arms, urging them to run. Her heart thundered deafeningly in her ears, drowning out the soft rustle of the leaves. As they made their way to the end of the yard, the world narrowed, the trees looming larger, swallowing any hope of safety. Each step felt like a countdown, a beat away from disaster. Ben and Lily's breath quickened, matching her pace as the shadows chased, darting and retreating with each flicker of her light. And then it happened, a harsh scream from behind them, slicing through the night. A figure stumbled out from the house's moor, colliding with the ground. It was their neighbor, Mr. Jensen, his eyes wide with horror. "You have to help me!" he screamed, his voice drenched in panic. The family faltered. "Stay away!" Sarah cried, urging her kids back. Mr. Jensen crawled closer, his skin pale, his clothes tattered, as if part of him had already been claimed by the dark. "They won't let me go! You have to help me!" Ben gasped. "Mum, we can't leave him! Listen to me!" Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "If we help him, we risk it all. We need to think about us." The shadows stirred restlessly around them, hissing in agreement, as though they had sensed the moment of indecision. But those weary, panicked eyes of Mr. Jensen held a chilling truth. "You have to go to the windmill," he implored. "It's the only place. Don't listen!" The darkness roared, echoing the terror in his eyes. The shadows flickered in agitation, and Sarah could feel their weight pushing against her resolve. "Mommy, please!" Lily's voice trembled, pulling at Sarah's heart, forcing her to contend with the decision. The windmill loomed in the distance, a silhouette against the sickly moonlight. Its blades were stilled, but appeared poised, ready to turn. "There's something there," Ben urged, his young voice fierce with determination. Before Sarah could respond, a shriek of frustration erupted from the shadows, echoing through the night. "You want to give in? Come closer!" The air crackled, expanding with the weight of fear. "Run!" Sarah shouted, adrenaline thrusting her forward. They turned, sprinting toward the windmill, but the darkness twisted behind them, elongating and stretching like a beast awakening from sleep. Sarah felt the tingle of cold fingers nip at her back, knowing they were only steps away from being consumed. As they broke the tree line and stumbled into the clearing, her flashlight flickered violently. Shadows roared, thrashing against the sudden vulnerability the light provided. The windmill stood ominous and towering, a guardian, but also a beacon to something deeper. "Mom, are we safe?" Lily whimpered as Sarah swung her flashlight toward the windmill's door, half hoping they would find refuge inside. But as they approached, the door creaked open, inviting and sinister. "Join us," whispered a voice from within, the voice of the darkness, promising liberation from their plight. In that instant, Sarah felt the weight of a choice bearing down on her. Was it a way to safety or a trap of deception? "Do we go in?" Ben asked, his eyes wide with uncertainty, glancing toward his sister. The shadows writhed, hungry and swirling. They hadn't ceased their pursuit. Time hung like a pendulum, swinging slowly in the chilling air. In searching for safety, could they find only despair? The door waited, and with it the unknown loomed. The windmill loomed before them, a towering silhouette in the moonlight. The door still gaped open as if inviting them to step inside. Sarah's heart pounded against her ribcage, a drum of fear urging her body to flee. What if it's a trap, she thought, her instincts screaming to turn and run back to the safety of the tree line. "Mom, it's calling to us," Ben said faintly, his eyes fixated on the darkness within. Lily clutched his arm, trembling, unsure of what to do. Each passing second felt like an eternity. The air thickened, squeezing her throat. Shadows skittered closer, their whispers swirling, seductive and dark. "It's never too late," they cooed, promising an end to their terror if they surrendered. But what did that even mean? What would it cost them? "Stay back," Sarah warned. She could feel the tendrils of shadow slithering around her ankles, tugging at her energy, seeking to pull her down into an abyss. Fear flickered in her heart with every inhalation, each breath weighed down by desperation. "Mom!" Lily squeaked, her voice barely above a whisper. The innocence in her eyes pierced Sarah. She had to protect them. "Okay, listen. We go in. But we're careful. We stick together and—" Sarah's voice faltered as she spotted movement from within the windmill. A figure stirred in the shadows, its outline shifting and undulating like smoke. What was that? Ben quivered, glancing up at his mother with wide eyes. Sarah swallowed hard. "I don't know. But we have to make a choice." The urge to flee battled with the need to uncover the truth. "Join us," the voice called again, softer now, but still filled with that eerie allure. "Your burdens can be lifted. Leave behind your pain." "Shut up!" Sarah shouted, anger surging through her. The shadows twitched at her words, hissing and retreating momentarily, almost as if they recoiled from her defiance. "Mum, I'm scared," Lily whined, and the sound of her sister's fear twisted in Sarah's gut. "Stay close, okay?" she murmured, reaching down to clasp both their hands tightly. "On 3, we go in. 1, 2... Suddenly, the wind howled, rattling the windmill like an ancient beast awakening from a slumber. The door creaked wider, a yawn that felt endless. 3! She pushed through the threshold, dragging her kids behind her. Darkness engulfed them instantly. The air turned heavy, suffocating in its intensity, wrapping around them like a thick fog. The flashlight flickered and died, leaving them in utter blackness. Panic ripped through Sarah as her heart raced, pounding in her ears. "Mom!" Ben's voice quivered, pressing against her side. "I can't see!" "Hold on, I'm here," she whispered, squeezing her children's hands. The oppressive silence that followed felt alive, as if the darkness itself was watching, listening, waiting for them to make their next move. Suddenly a low, guttural growl rumbled through the chamber, reverberating off the walls. A shuffle filled the space, slow and deliberate, creating a dreadful rhythm with each echo. "Run!" Sarah shouted in a rush, pulling the kids toward a faint glimmer of light shimmering deep within. But with each step the whispers returned, growing louder, more insistent. "You can't escape your past," they droned, merging into a discordant symphony. "You're finally home." A chilling thought streaked through Sarah's mind. What if the shadows were right? What if they could find peace here? The whispers entwined with her own insecurities, casting doubts on her resolve. They sprinted into the light, and at the end of the hallway there it was. A massive mechanism, gears turning slowly but purposefully. A sense of inevitability hung in the air. "Mum!" Ben yelled, but his voice was lost in a sudden cacophony as the shadows burst forth from behind them. Sarah spun, her blood turning to ice as the darkness metamorphosed into a torrent of faces, each twisted with agony. They cried out, begging for release, reaching for her with grasping hands. And then the windmill's mechanism clicked louder, almost jubilant, a force pulling them in, a choice set before them. Would they confront the screams or join the cacophony? In that moment, nothing felt certain except the inescapable dread that clung to them like sweat. They stood at the threshold of salvation or damnation, and as the shadows closed in tighter, one thought pierced through thickening fear. What if the true horror awaited them on the other side of the light? "Don't look back," Sarah urged as they stumbled into the brightness, but the shadows followed, relentless and hungry. The light blinked, flaring once, and then everything fell silent. "What's happening?" Lily's voice trembled, reflecting the palpable tension. As Sarah clung to her children, she realized the real nightmare was about to unfold. What they've sought might just lead them deeper into darkness. As whispers merged into roars, everything swirled around them, a vortex of doubt and terror. Suddenly the light flickered out, plunging them back into darkness, and in that pitch-black silence, a whisper drifted through the air. "Welcome home." What awaited them inside felt far worse than the shadows before. Was it too late to turn back? The silence was almost deafening, a stifling presence wrapping around them like an invisible shroud. Sarah felt her heartbeat pulse in her ears, a frantic reminder of their alive humanity against the smothering void. Clenching her children's hands tighter, she fought down the rising tide of panic threatening to swallow her whole. "Mom," Ben whispered, his breath shaky against the growing darkness. "I can't see anything. What's happening?" "I don't know," Sarah returned, her voice trembling despite her attempt at reassurance. "Just hold on." As her eyes adjusted to the dimness, she squinted into the fading remnants of light. They stood in a vast space, the windmill's interior larger than she'd expected. Cobwebs clung to the edges, hanging like ghostly veils amidst the crumbling walls, adorned with strange symbols, intertwined like the roots of ancient trees. A chill crept through her, whispering secrets only the darkness knew. The growl they had heard earlier echoed again, more pronounced now, vibrating through the floorboards beneath them. It was close, and closer still, the air thickening with the scent of decay. The shadows shifted and coalesced into misshapen figures, their faces obscured but their moans distinct, forming a horrific melody of despair. "Let's get out of here," Lily squeaked, her voice rising with a mix of fear and urgency. She tugged at her mother's arm, her small frame trembling like a fragile leaf in a storm. "Wait, we can't just—" Sarah started but stopped short. From the shadows stepped a figure, one that made her breath hitch in terror. It was a woman, draped in tattered rags that flapped as if caught in a breeze that shouldn't exist there. Her eyes glowed, a gaze filled with unfathomable sadness and despair. "Don't go," the figure rasped, her voice a discordance of despair lost within a realm of torment. "Find peace. Join us." "Mom!" Ben's voice broke through the moment, urgent and raw. He was pulling Sarah back, desperation clawing at him. "We have to be careful." The spectre reached out, bony fingers beckoning them forward. The shadows pulsated with excitement, swirling around her, growing restless. Another shape joined her, then another, each one more grotesque than the last. Faces warped by pain, bodies twisted in unnatural ways, all begging silently for release. "Please, we have to leave," Sarah screamed, turning with urgency to escape the growing throng. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a flicker of doubt, a temptation to heed their calls, to surrender to the darkness. But the look of fear on her children's faces reignited her instincts. "Follow me," she commanded, racing toward a dim light shimmering at the far end of the room. As they ran, the sinister laughter surrounded them, pulling at their heels like a demon's breath. "You cannot run from your past. You belong here." The echoes swirled around them, creating a maelstrom of dread that sought to draw them back into the abyss. Suddenly the ground trembled, and the windmills shuddered violently. A creaking sound filled the air, an ominous warning that the ancient structure was not in their favor. "Look out!" Sarah screamed as a heavy beam fell from above, splintering into pieces as it crashed beside them. "Keep going!" She gripped her kids' hands, pushing them ahead. They ducked under more falling debris, but with each moment it felt as if the windmill itself was coming alive, turning against them. Finally they burst through another door, plunging into another dark corridor. The whispers chased them, darting behind their steps, growing ever more frantic, desperate for their attention. "Mom, please!" Ben cried, his voice cracking. I know," Sarah responded, fear sharpening every nerve. They stumbled ahead, the corridor narrowing as if it was a throat, tightening as they approached the end. In that moment of fleeing, a sense of dread clouded over her, weighing heavily like a storm on the horizon. What waited beyond the door ahead? Was it safety, or even worse, the long-forgotten truth lurking in wait for them? A noise emerged, sharp and shattering, as the door creaked slowly open. The wind from outside poured in with a deafening howl, forcing Sarah back against the walls. "Take it or leave it," came the voice again, the shadows swelling, insisting with a fervor that made her skin crawl. "You can abandon your pain, or you can face it. The choice is yours, forever." Their breathing quickened, panic skimming the surface like dry leaves caught in a whirlwind. Just as Sarah stepped forward to make that fateful decision, a ground-shaking roar erupted from behind. It was the sound of something monstrous, awakening. In fledgling sunlight spilling through the door, the truth hung heavy in the air as hope wrestled with blinding fear. Would they be lost to the shadows forever, or could they escape this dark place? With a voice both soothing and sinister, the murmurs coiled tighter, whispering, "This is only the beginning." The winds howled as Sarah, gripping her children's hands tightly, stood on the precipice of the threshold. The air outside was alive with a sense of anticipation, electric and terrifying. The monstrous roar from within the shadows echoed ominously, sending a tremor of fear coursing through her veins. She could feel the cold fingers of darkness wrapping around her, whispering doubts into her ear, urging her to abandon her fight. "We need to go," she shouted, her voice laced with urgency, as she dragged Ben and Lily closer to the light spilling through the door. The cacophony of shadows surged behind her, and for a moment she felt the weight of despair pinning her down. "Mom!" Ben cried again, his small face pale with fright. "I won't let them take you." Sarah gasped, her heart pounding fiercely. She turned sharply to face the swirling darkness, the grotesque figures emerging, mocking her with twisted grins, eyes hollow as they extended claw-like hands. The light beckoned like a beacon of hope, and Sarah refused to relent. "This ends tonight," she shouted defiantly. "You won't take my family." Then, with all her strength, she surged forward into the light, dragging her children behind her. The split second they crossed through the threshold, the darkness screamed, an ear-piercing wail that reverberated in her very bones. The shadows recoiled but didn't retreat far. They lingered just outside the light, their angry whispers echoing in a chilling harmony. As they stumbled into the daylight, Sarah felt something shift within her. It was as if the shadows were losing their grip, the light feeding into her resolve. "Look," she said, pointing toward the windmill that now stood ominously behind them. "We've got to destroy it." The children nodded, their eyes wide with fear, but also a hint of courage sparked by their mother's determination. They turned to face the windmill, the oppressive air thickening as the shadows writhed, desperately seeking footholds once more. "Together," Sarah said, focusing every ounce of her will. "We're not afraid." She lifted her flashlight and aimed it at the windmill, flicking it on. A fierce beam shot through the shadowy remnants that surrounded them, the light cutting through like a sword, igniting a path against the darkness. With a fierce shout, she and her kids began their rush toward the windmill, pushing against the wind that whipped through the clearing. The shadows shrieked in fury, snapping like angry serpents, but this time they were met with resolute bravery. "Mom! Look!" Lily shouted, pointing as cracks began to form in the windmill's structure. Sarah could feel the energy shift, the very foundation of the darkness trembling at their strength. "We can end this," Sarah shouted, fueling her courage. They reached the windmill, and in a surge of decisive action, Sarah directed her kids to focus their lights onto the cracks. The windmill shuddered as beams of light pierced through, illuminating the malevolent designs that had decorated its worn walls. With a deafening roar, the shadows pounded against the wood, but the combined light kept them at bay. "Keep going," Sarah encouraged, adrenaline pushing them forward. As they lit up more of the cracks, the windmill howled back in anguish. "We can't stop now!" With bated breath, they pressed on. The final beams of light erupted, flooding the interior, where the darkness twisted desperately, trying to cling to remnants of its hold. Then, with a flash that felt like the sun breaking through storm clouds, the windmill imploded upon itself. Light exploded outward, swallowing the shadows whole. The screams of despair turned into wails of defeat, the air filling with the promise of liberation. Sarah shielded her children, and as the darkness collapsed, the windmill disintegrated, leaving nothing but whispers carried away in the wind. Finally, the world around them was painted with a calm they hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. The landscape brightened, colors bursting forth from the grip of night, vibrant and alive. "We did it!" Ben yelled, launching himself into his mother's arms. Lily hugged them tightly, relief washing over her. With the shadows banished, the weight of dread began to lift. Sarah looked at her children, their faces radiant with the joy of survival. "Promise me," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion, "we will never let fear control us again. We stand together no matter what comes our way." They nodded, knowing their bond had weathered the worst of storms and emerged stronger on the other side. The screams of the past faded like echoes on the wind, and with a heart full of hope, Sarah led her children away from the remnants of a horror they had faced together. Their laughter filled the air as they moved toward a new beginning. As they walked away, Sarah glanced back one last time at the windmill, gone now, replaced by the light of a new dawn. There, in the distance, the past began to dissolve, taking the shadows with it. It was time to build a new memory in the light. Now, that you've reached the end of this spine-chilling tale. It's your moment to act. You need to subscribe now so you won't miss our next exclusive stories that will thrill and chill you. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm and show your support. Flood the comment section with your reactions and theories about this ending. What did you think? And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see how this story unfolds. Your engagement matters. Let's spread the word and make sure nobody misses out.